Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Laguna Hills Nursery, where Gary and our topic for this morning is called sustainable gardening. And does anybody want to share some ideas of what they believe sustainable gardening is, as it's a relatively new concept? I did some research on it, and I think that word was kind of coined in the 80s and really became more of a practice, and I'm sure Gary will add to it more in like the early 2000s. So it's a relatively new concept. How would you define sustainable gardening, any of you?
I don't know. For me, I think it's about your soil, like soil being important and allowing your garden to keep reproducing.
So soil health.
I think it's more about you don't have to put in more than you're actually getting back.
Putting in more.
Like putting in more resources than what you're actually getting back.
The general concept with sustainable gardening is, and the concept is to bring minimal products from outside sources and gardening like within your property with the resources that are there. An example being with the materials that you're pruning and cutting from, whether it be your vegetables or from your trees, and recycling those items back into the garden. Your kitchen scraps that are from inside your house, turning those back into compost and using those to feed your plants. You're working within your property and using, again, very little to few resources from outside, both on the plant care, pest control, fertilizers, the whole list of plant care, and trying to do it within your property, and again, taking very little from outside. Another important concept when it comes to sustainable gardening is that it's always organic, and that's another important consideration. There's going to be several topics that Gary's going to go more into, specifically talking about mulch, fertilizers, and soil health. Whisper in my ears a couple more ideas. Pest control. I know all fall in line with sustainable gardening. Is there another one you want to throw? And crop rotation. So another healthy practice for making sure that your plants perform at optimal conditions. What I want to focus on, that is my introduction to sustainable gardening, is I want to start off with talking about the gardening concept known as whitewashing. And that is, again, my name is Charles Malki. I'm a biologist, plant expert with Ivory Organics. A handful, I'd say close to half of you guys already know me. How many of you, just a show of hands, have seen me, whether it be on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? Oh, there's a few more hands than I expected. Yeah. And my mom and dad that are in the left corner, they've seen me. It's their first garden club that they've ever been to. So thanks for watching and giving me the added stress of now having to meet mom and dad's expectations too. But I want to start off with whitewashing, and I want you guys, because I have a cheat sheet, which I did not give to you guys. There's some information you have on Ivory Organics, and some of the answers I'm going to share with you have. My goal is I want all of you, between me and Gary, to leave with more information and make this your best growing season ever. And what I typically do to make sure that you've left knowing is I'll have typically a lot of blanks. I'll have your pens in hand. And if you don't have the answers, that means you left learning something new. But I've made it easier because all the answers are here. You don't have to take the notes, but I'm going to kind of question you, see what feedback I get, and then I'm just going to give you all the answers. And it's a very short cheat sheet, which I think if you follow these 5 gardening tips, it will help make this your best growing season ever. And it's quite simple, whether you're a beginning gardener or an advanced gardener. But I want to get into whitewashing first. How would you define whitewashing? Any of you?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
Not in a gardening context.
No?
You said what?
Whitewashing? For plants.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen you wax.
Yeah, so you know. The ones that have their hands up know what it is. It's shocking that I'll go to nurseries that are stocking our products, and I'll come in teaching the staff that work there the word whitewashing. They're like, just as you said, never heard it, don't know what it is. And whitewashing, typically if you drive up and down the 5 freeway, you'll sometimes notice some of the youngest trees are painted white. And you'll see trees, or maybe grandparents' houses, you'll see the trees are being painted white. And they typically just go to the hardware store, pick up some paint, mix it with water, apply it to the tree. And with my next question to you all is, why whitewash your trees? And anybody, even if you've actually seen me, what is it going to do? So pest protection, other ones, sun damage, sun. Would you say, show of hands, is it more of a summer issue to whitewash your trees or a winter issue to whitewash your trees? Painting your trees white. Just let's say painting them. Typically the bottom, like you're protecting the trunk. And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on that in a second. What's that?
Don't do pure paint.
We're going to get into the pure paint in a second. You should be using Arbor Organic. If you Google the word whitewashing, whitewashing is predominantly, across the entire country, a winter protection of plants. You're basically protecting them from an issue known as sun scald. And so with the Arbor Organics products, it reads on here, protection from damaging sunburn insects and rodents. But that sunburn predominantly protection across the country is you're protecting your plants from winter sun scald, which is a phenomenon where the ground is too cold, typically near freezing temperature, but you get daytimes that can sometimes be 60, 70 degrees, and the plant fluids above the ground is moving, and the plant sometimes will push growth, sometimes flower, which is not in sync with what's happening below the ground. So by whitewashing the plant, you're keeping the plant cool as it should because the soil is still cool, and that the plant wakes up in line with warmer soils. And then the plants will perform better, they'll bloom, consistent with the season. Overall, you mentioned sunburn. It's now going to protect your plants through the harshness of those sunny days since it doesn't have a canopy yet. So they're pushing out the new leaves and now protecting the underlying tree trunks and branches. And the list just continues on and on and on. For me, with all of the practices important for gardening, which include, fertilizers and mulching and pruning and all the, topics, whitewashing, which means, painting what I call, and I've defined, and I haven't seen anybody else do this, the heart of the tree. And we did a recent video on Ivory Organics YouTube channel where we lowered the heart of the tree being the tree trunk, which let's say is the body, and then the lower branches. As long as I protect the heart of the plant, being again the tree trunk and the lower branches, from damaging sunburn and insect invasions, like let's say I prune the branch, now I've got an open wound that's going to take a few years to heal, I'm going to seal that up. Rose prune seals, tree prune seals that are typically, whether they're latex-based or tar-based products, is non-organic ways of accomplishing it. And one of the things, now talking about the Ivory Organics products, Ivory Organics was born to basically replace the traditional ways of whitewashing, which is, for the last 100 years, has been using paint from, again, those paint stores. Prior to that, going back thousands of years ago, people would typically use limestone. That was like a healthy way, and that's one of the ingredients you'll find in the product. Mica, which is clay, another way to basically lighten the tree trunk and protect it from those extremes. These ingredients are a lot more complicated, again, all being organic. Milk proteins are in there that help it with the bonding so it lasts closer to about a year. One application will typically protect your plant for an entire year from the harshness of the summer sun, and also take it through the coldest days of winter as well. Offering protection from winter sun scald is the definition. So with paint, which has been the way most American farmers have been protecting their trees, was using paint from the paint store. There's interior, latex paint, exterior latex paint. Between the two, which one is the better paint you would want to use if you were to put paint on your trees? What would you use? Interior, exterior, latex paint? Interior. Interior? Any exterior? Because it's going outside, right? Exterior? Exterior?
I use primer, interior, exterior.
Interior, exterior?
Yeah.
So, you want to know what's the reason that the research supports that you should be using interior latex paint over exterior latex paint? Any guesses? Ingredients. Which one's
Latex or because stretches?
what's that?
The lack of permeability.
The permeability. What do you think would be different? What would an exterior paint have that has more than what an interior paint should have?
Oil.
It's not the oil.
Strength.
It's more antifungal. So it has more ingredients that kill plant life. Overall, the difference between interior and exterior paint is that interior paint is less toxic, but both of them are toxic. They're both bad. You put paint on your house, 100 years later, there's still paint on your house. you put paint on your trees, how long is that bark going to be on your tree? Within 1 to 3 years, that tree is going to create a new layer of bark, and all that paint's now where? In your soil forever. So it's not just the home gardeners that are doing whitewashing organically. We also have now orchards all across the country, pecan farms in the middle of the country, avocado farms in South Florida. And if they've got the certification that they're organic farms, they are even prohibited from using paint on their trees. So Ivory Organics was born, and that was on one of our first products was the 3-in-1 plant guard, is to protect your plants from, again, damaging sunburn. What it also has is these oils. So when you get the can, it comes with a bubble-wrapped oil vial and then the base powder. And again, that base powder, as we said, is based on that traditional 1,000-year-old practice of using limestone and mica, which is clay, those milk proteins, and then it's got these 7 natural garden oils, which include castor, cinnamon, cloves, garlic, peppermint, rosemary, and spearmint, all of these oils that are naturally pest-resistant plants. So you mix the powders with the oils, fill up the can with water, and you've got a can of organic paint, which is registered material for use in organic agriculture, and that'll protect your plants from all of those things.
How long does that last?
As I said, it protects your plants for about a year.
Once
Yeah.
you mix it in.
So once you mix it in, great question. So the product has a shelf life of 5 years. Once you add water to it, it recommends you use the product within 2 weeks. If you know you don't need a full can, I recommend using like half the powder, half the oils, and then half of the amount of water. You can use it as a tree paste by using less water. And the same can, as you see on your sheets here, can make, somewhere in the middle, it reads, can make up to 5 gallons of also a foliar spray. So I can make somewhere between 20 to 25 of these using one of the pint cans. Again, by diluting it, the instructions on the back recommend that you can take about a third to a half of a teaspoon of the powder at a time with about 5 to 10 drops of oil. Make sure you filter it before you put it in your spray bottle, and now you've got a solution you can you can use a paint filter, you can use a t-shirt, washcloth, anything. The goal is just to make sure that it's fine enough that it doesn't block or clog your spraying. So however you would filter something before you put it into your sprayer. And the same thing applies also for a gallon. So if it makes 5 gallons and you have a gallon tank sprayer, you're going to spray your entire garden, or if you've got tall avocado trees, you want to get up in the canopy and protect it from weather extremes. How much of this powder am I going to use to make a gallon? Come on, you math experts. 1/5. So 1/5 of this powder makes 1 gallon, right? And you can use 1/5 of the oil and then and make a gallon. Thanks for that. I thought I had to give the answer away. That was my easy one. Yeah, we're not here for math. One other thing I want to share about whitewash as well is the plants. I brought over here. Can you guys guess what this plant is, even though it's all chopped up? So Plumeria. This was one of the stems that came off of so I protected the heart of the plant. And again, the goal is to protect the heart, being the tree trunk lower branches. So this came off one of those side branches. And I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to pass it around. One side of the Plumeria has got sunburn. You can see this entire length is sunburn. I would say close to a 2nd degree sunburn, because this is pretty significant burn, change of color. This here, I'd say 3rd degree sunburn, meaning the bark's damaged, the cambium tissue is gone, the underlying wood is now exposed. I've done a YouTube video sharing where someone had an orange tree in North Hollywood where they had a branch that was growing towards the pool. Landscaper cut the branch out of the way to make the walkway around the plant easier. But now the tree trunk that was naturally in the shade year-round was now getting light into the understory of the canopy. The bark, 3rd degree burns. The bark, I was just peeling it right off. It was just crumbling off. We still whitewashed it, but for the plant to heal, and we're talking about there's at least a 50, 60-year-old orange tree, for it to heal, I mean, its width was about as wide as my body. For it to heal over that entire wound is probably not going to happen in its lifetime. And now we're dealing with exposed wood. The 3-in-1 plant guard will still prevent termites and beetles from now entering that unprotected wood. So we're going to still continue to coat it to maximize the longevity of the tree and enjoy some more fruit-bearing years. But I'm going to just pass this around so you can see the burn on the Plumeria. And then these are the branches that came off the top of the plant that were still not damaged. I was going to give this a round and let's see how far it goes. You can keep it. This is my gift. I don't have room to plant any more Plumerias. So if one of you guys want that, there's instructions. I don't know. I knew somebody was going to ask me. I don't know. I don't remember from last year, unfortunately. So Hollywood we talked about. The heart of the tree we talked about. And the other point I want to make about with nursery trees, and I brought this example over here. And these avocados are for sale here as well. And these are very young avocados. You can see the seed. They're grafted with all these different varieties of avocados. But my point with this is all of the trees that you'll see within a nursery, and from the time they were created, have always been in groups and clusters like this. But once you buy the tree from the nursery, you take it home, in a matter of hours, what was once a shaded tree trunk, kind of like that orange tree that was pruned in spring, by summer, third-degree burns, and all of the trunk on the one side of the tree, and this is going to lead to my next question, got burned. The other side didn't get burnt. My question to you is, at noon, where's the sun in the sky?
Straight up.
Straight up, like right there? So if my branches are all stretched out like this, that means all sides of me are getting equal amount of sun all the way around if the sun is straight up, right? The answer would be true if I was living on the equator, because the sun hovers over the equator. It's a little bit above the equator, whether it's summer or winter, and on the other side of the equator for the opposite season. The globe, which I have over here, will demonstrate this better. If I were standing at the North Pole, since we're in the northern hemisphere, looking down towards the equator, since the sun is hovering around the equator, what side of my face is going to get the most sun? The south. So you always hear about plants, the south side of the plant burns, but if I were in Australia, now I'm in the southern hemisphere looking up to the equator because that's where the sun's hovering, then it's going to be the north side of our body or in our plants that are going to get most sunburn. So when it comes to protecting your plants, if you're only going to coat or protect, some people when they plant and they stake their trees, they'll typically put the stake in the position of at least guarding and protecting that tree trunk from continuous exposure to sun. Just like our own skin, you'd want to protect it if you're in the sun for more than, for some of you, it's immediately, but I sometimes enjoy my 10 to 20 minutes of unprotected skin before putting on sunblock. You treat your plants the same way. And I just wanted to share that with you. And that concludes my lesson on whitewashing. Is there any questions on it?
Was this
Yeah.
sprayed with a light spray?
No, that's all natural. I kind of was demonstrating something. That's why that one got a little bit of paint on it. But that's that. The last thing I want to share with you guys real quick is fertilizers. And there's a couple of important tips I want to share with you. When it comes to fertilizing your plants, there's macronutrients and micronutrients that when you pick up a bag of fertilizer, there's going to be numbers on there. And the macronutrients, just as the name says, macro means abundance. I need more of it, big, like bigger. Macro means big, and micro means small. So your macronutrients, you need a lot more of it in your soil. Your micronutrients, you need less. With your macronutrients, what are the 3 macronutrients that are on every single fertilizer, or should be on every single bag of fertilizer or liquid fertilizer that you buy? So number 1, it's always the first position. What's the first number? Nitrogen. From this side, what's the second number? No. Phosphorus. And then the third one is potassium. At least you got them. So these are the 3 that you'll see all the fertilizers marketing and saying we've got it. Nitrogen for greening, phosphorus for flower and fruiting, and then potassium for root development, disease resistance, so forth. So these 3. But how many macronutrients? You can go on Google and research plant macronutrients. What are they going to say? 3? 4? How many? Any guesses? 10? For those of you familiar with this product, what does it say? So 6 macros. Plants need 6 macronutrients, and that was the development of the 6 macros plus fertilizers that just came out like last year, spring, summer. 6 macros plus gives your plants, it's the first time any fertilizer, and it's kind of logical, that has all of the macronutrients in one. Instead of buying your NPK, which is your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizers, and then buying CalMag, your calcium, magnesium separately, and then getting your Epsom salts to get your magnesium and sulfur separately. This product actually has it all. Take a look at these super blends, and this is where the big raffle giveaway comes in. I should have already had this circulating. We'll do it now because I think our attendance is here. I'm going to keep this paper clip so it doesn't get all mixed up. So take one of these papers out of the paper clip. If you want to help yourself some candy, you can help yourself. It's not organic. And then there's a pen. Simply write just your first name and or maybe a last initial, and we'll do the drawing at the end. We're going to give away, and now I'm going to start explaining, 6 Macros Plus Fertilizers has all of the macronutrients plants need, which are sulfur. Take that back. Let's start with the beginning. Your NPKs, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. What are the other 3 macronutrients plants need? Calcium. So calcium's in all of the plant cell walls. Another one? Magnesium. Magnesium's in the heart of the chlorophyll molecule. And the third one? And then sulfur. Sulfur is also an important ingredient towards the greening of the plant. So you can use this in conjunction with your other organic fertilizers, knowing that they're getting all of the macronutrients that they need, a lot of the micronutrients, and also contains a lot of the beneficial microbes and mycorrhizae as well. I'm going to put this in your hands to just circulate so you guys can see it. Check out the ingredients. There's the Super Blend fertilizer, which has one of the highest NPKs. I know that when you take a look at a fertilizer, some of them have like a 0.01 nitrogen. So small. Take a look and consider what you're buying also. This has an NPK of 13, 12, 13. So one of the highest NPKs you'll find in the organic fertilizer market. And then magnesium, sulfur, and calcium. The ingredients, it's an entire paragraph long. It's not just 1 to 5 ingredients to make sure your plants get everything. So that's what I want to share with you on that. The last thing I want to add is when feeding your soil organically, you're feeding the soil life. If you're feeding with a chemical, sometimes people say chemical. On the back side of this sheet that I'm going to give to you is the periodic table. And I just want to share with you that the word chemical applies for organic as well as the synthetic. So make sure that when you use the word chemical that you try to maybe clarify and say, the synthetic fertilizers, which are like the man-made chemical stuff that are not derived from organic sources. For example, in the 6 Macros Plus, I'll just read a few of the ingredients. There'll be feather meal, alfalfa meal, fishbone meal, kelp meal, cottonseed meal. List continues. Like I said, it's about 50 ingredients. The goal is what's happening when you add it to the soil is you're feeding the soil biology. What's in your soil that you're feeding? Any guesses?
The microbes.
Give me 3. Microbes being the beneficial bacteria. 2? There's 3 main ones. We're not feeding the moles and the gophers. But you're right. Those guys are in the soil too, huh? What? Worms. So that's a big one. So we got the worms, and then this one last one being, I like calling them mushrooms and fungus, but there's another name for it. It's on that bag that's circulating. Your mycorrhiza. So your mycorrhiza, also sometimes referred to as the hypha, are the roots of your mushrooms. And some people know mycorrhiza very well, but they never made the connection that the mushrooms that you see in your garden are the fruiting bodies of the mycorrhiza that's underneath. And they're there the whole year round, especially if you're doing mulching, which I'm going to let Gary go into in his talk. But by mulching, you're creating good, hospitable environment for the soil life, which includes, again, the earthworms, which in my handful of dirt might be 1, 2, or 3 earthworms, but billions of beneficial bacteria and billions of those hypha of the beneficial mycorrhiza. One mushroom has those hypha roots or mycorrhiza that can reach as far as 1,000 feet. So imagine one mushroom can network moving water and nutrients between all the plants in your entire garden with just one mushroom. That's your evidence that it's in your garden. But if you see those white filament threads that are typically between the compost and the soil, that means there's a good network happening in your soil. It's very exciting. I like your smile. Yeah.
So it's good when we see mushrooms come up.
Yeah, it's a very big deal. I don't eat the mushrooms in my garden because I don't know what's what when it comes to mushrooms, but a very good sign that your plants are happy because they're balancing the movement of water within the entire garden. A very big deal. So with fertilizers, the thing I wanted to highlight with worms is that by having more worms in your garden, because you're feeding them organically, the synthetic stuff, the chemical, man-made chemical stuff, is potentially harming and maybe even killing the beneficial life in your soil, whereas the organic stuff is feeding them. And the goal is by having more worms. Another thing that some research supports is that you've heard of worm castings, worm gold, and so forth. Their compost has also chitinase in it. And chitinase is an enzyme that the plants uptake, and they say that insects that then now eat the plants that have chitinase in their bodies. So a aphid or beetle or whatever or grasshopper that's chewing on your plants that have chitinase within the plant, because you've got earthworms and they're creating natural worm gold in your soil instead of just buying worm castings. You can make it by feeding your soil organically. Now your plants are, what it does is chitinase is an enzyme that breaks down chitin, and chitin is the exoskeleton of all of those insects. Your aphids, your beetles, your grasshoppers, anything that has an exoskeleton, it's making them weaker. So now you've naturally created an environment within your garden where if pests come and chew on your plants, instead of getting healthier eating your plants, they're getting sicker naturally. So chitinase, I actually even spelled it out, and I Googled it to make sure. Chitin, so that's chitin, and then you add ASE for the enzyme. So chitin again is CHITIN. And that's it. That concludes my number 1, number 2 points relating to sustainable gardening. I want to give the floor to Gary. If Gary, you can hear me, the floor is yours. I'm going to share with you my notes that I kind of was speaking off of, and I'm going to split that there.
Can you pass that other piece of paper around and I can take a picture of it, the one that you said?
This here?
No.
Tell me.
The ones with the answer.
That's the one with the answers. I just gave it to you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Are there any other questions until Gary gets here?
Just when would you use one over the other, the super blend versus the premium?
Oh, so a great question. So there's a super and a premium blend fertilizer. The super blend, I mean, when you take a look at it, the retail price is a little higher than most organic fertilizers. So we had to do something that's more comparable to the market. This is an amazing product. We put our heart and soul into and kind of network the country trying to find out how can we best make a product that will give the plants all these benefits that otherwise don't exist. That was a super blend. We then created something with lower NPK. This is a 244, so a lower way to still get the macronutrients to your plants at a price that's more comparable to market, but you're getting lower NPK compared to you can use less of this, knowing that it's higher, but and 1% of this ingredient is in here as well. If it's specifically like for tomatoes, this has a very high calcium, it's 17%. But the brains of the idea with the 6 macros is the super blend. The premium was created just to create a product that's more in line with the products that are out there on the market. So super blend is the higher NPK, and then the premium blend is the lower NPK. I don't have that on hand, but the floor is yours, Gary. I'm going to mic you up.
How far can you use that?
Typically, and it should have had a sticker on there, they typically read when you look online that the smaller bags make 20 gallons, tablespoon to a gallon of water, or you can just scatter it around the plant. And then there's the 4-pound bags that make 120 gallons. And like I said, I would incorporate with your other organic ways and to kind of just know that your plants are getting everything like for the first time. Let me give you the mic.
All right, thanks everybody for coming in today. We're going to talk a little bit more about, well, in fact, one note I'll make about fertilizer that is a nice point to know is that fertilizer is not like food for you. So when you eat food, if you're hungry or you're weak and whatnot, you eat food, you get stronger, you feel better. Now with plants, just remember that fertilizers are building materials. It's to make them grow. So if you feed fertilizer to a plant, if you give plant fertilizer, you're not making it stronger. They get all their strength from the energy of the sun. That's their source of energy is the sunlight. The fertilizer, it's like telling a person who's really sick, oh, I'm going to give this to you, now go build a wall. Build something. So it actually lowers the energy level of plants when you fertilize them. So just remember that. If you just leave it alone in the sun, it's gaining energy. You fertilize it, it's growing, it's using energy to do that. Now, there is a trick that you can do to actually make plants stronger. And we found this out back in the 80s. It was kind of interesting. So if you really want to make a weak plant stronger, you hit it with some form of sugar. So back in the 80s, we had an article, California fruit growers had an article in their little journal about people in Palos Verdes up in the cloud layer near the coast. The citrus trees wouldn't flower and fruit because they couldn't get any energy. It was too cloudy up there. So someone up there had seen an article back east where a university was making hardwood cuttings of a tree, and they weren't quite rooting and finishing. And they noticed that they determined that the carbohydrate content of the little cutting was dropping so low they couldn't finish the cutting. They couldn't finish making the roots. So they devised a formula of sugar and fertilizer to help the trees' cuttings finish the rooting. And so they saw this thing and said, oh, light bulb went off. Let's spray the foliage of our trees and see what happens. So I saw that article. I said, okay, try it on my citrus trees. And it never flowered or fruited, and I got like 200 oranges next year. I'm going, okay, this might have been a coincidence. So I had a plum tree in my yard, a 15-foot wide plum tree, and it averaged about 5 fruit per branch. We said, okay, let's just spray one branch and see what happens. So in the fall, when fruit trees are storing energy for next year's bloom and crop, we just took the solution they had and sprayed one branch 6 times. That's every 2 weeks during the fall. And the next year, that one branch had, instead of 5 plums, had 25. We're going, okay, they absorbed the sugar. So from that point on in our store, if we wanted to make plants grow faster, fruit more, flower more, we spray them with sugar. We've been doing that for what, since the mid-'80s? Well, the original formula was molasses, so we do sell molasses. Now, molasses will turn your roses brown. So if you want to spray your roses, just use carob syrup or table sugar. But let me give you the formula that they had, the original formula.
So this says a foliar and not a
Right, a foliar feed. So in 1 gallon of water, 1 ounce of molasses. Did I spell that right? 1 ounce. 1 gallon of water, 1 ounce of molasses, 1 ounce of fish emulsion. So fish emulsion would be the source of the minerals to make membranes of the plant.
Does it matter if the molasses is sulfured or unsulfured?
Have no clue. And 1 ounce of seaweed extract. So seaweed, the fastest growing plant on the planet, is loaded with growth hormones. So you spray seaweed on anything, you get leaves that are twice as big as normal and everything. So we found out that there's contests in the U.S. making growing big things. This is one of the secrets that they all do. They said you cannot grow a pumpkin. They have pumpkins now. 2,000 pounds. They said they can't break 500 if they don't do this.
This is what they mix. You just spray it?
Spray it on the leaves as often as you like. Now, it works a little better if you spritz them in the evening so that it stays moist longer. Just whatever part of the plant's green. Anything. Now, in the spring and summer, most plants will just grow faster. In the fall or winter, if they have leaves on them, then they will store the energy for the next spring's growth period.
So, Gary, you're not using the molasses as an emulsion. You're just using the seaweed, or all three?
All three are
You should be doing that.
right.
Okay.
And they're in that bottle there?
No. So you have to buy a bunch of stuff from us. Molasses, seaweed,
You can't just get molasses.
and the fish. Well, the molasses does the most important part. So if you just want to do sugar and spray on your plants, your plants will get stronger. But if you want them to grow faster, have huge leaves and flowers, you want to have fun with your plants, you use all of those, and you get some really interesting results.
And how many times a year would you recommend doing it?
You do it as often as you want. I mean, it makes the most difference when you have young plants and you're trying to get them going. So we do it here in the nursery every week during the spring and summer, but we don't do a whole lot in the fall. I mean, it's a lot of work to do it, but we've seen the results.
And should you not do it if it's fruiting or if it's flowering?
Oh no, it works. You're just giving it more. Essentially, what you're doing here is giving the plant an extra couple hours of sunlight every day.
Oh, this is all plants, vegetables and everything?
Right. So do remember that most of plant is made out of cellulose, and cellulose is sugar. Cellulose is just a sugar molecule that we can't eat. The only thing you can eat, sugar, cellulose, and turn it back into sugar are bacteria. So anything that eats wood or heavy plant material, beavers, cows, they all have bacteria in their guts. Termites have the bacteria, breaks down the cellulose back into sugar. Now just think, if we can work on that bacteria to change wood into sugar, no one would be hungry.
So would this be as a foliar spray or?
Yeah, foliar spray. Although, if you spray it on the ground, you'll still get results. So
So we use
Carol syrup works fine.
but those 3 items, would you spray that, is that what are you just talking about the seaweed extract for pumpkins?
No, you can do the same thing on everything.
Put it in the sprayer.
Right. We just hit the whole nursery with it.
It's not going to color the pumpkin?
The molasses can be colorful sometimes, and the fish and the seaweed make you smell like you're on the coast. So, I mean, there are substitutions you can do in here if you want. Sometimes we're right next to an apartment complex, so sometimes we don't use the fish, especially if it's in the summer when all the windows are open. We'll put in a chemical water-soluble fertilizer instead, so to give them a break. So.
So you sell all those things here?
Right, these are the 3 things I have on the shelf. Our bigger bottle of our fishes we sold out a couple days ago. Have to get some more. Okay, so that's the notes on fertilizers. Now, the main reason that I don't work for another company, we work for ourselves, is because of soil. So for some reason, the industry that we're a part of, horticulture industry, has the wrong notion of what dirt is, and it's just bugging us to death that the industry won't fix itself. So what the industry is doing is telling everybody, here's a sample that Charles gave me a year ago, of what everybody's promoting as dirt. So as amendment for the ground or just dirt for containers or beds, they're recommending chopped up trees. So this is basically compost, which, I would tell you it's a euphemistic term for what it really is, dead rotten tree. And they're telling you to grow plants in this. And it doesn't work. And, they have to make up all these new rules to make this stuff even have a chance to work. Don't water too much. Plants love water. You see what happened when it rained 20 inches this year. The plants really respond well. But if you try to grow a plant here, they'll tell you, don't water too much. You're going to overwater your plant. So, almost any plant can be grown hydroponically. So that's the issue. What's wrong with the industry when they're telling us don't water? It's because all the nurseries, wholesale growers, have been told by the universities to grow plants in compost. And when you grow them in something that's dead and rotten, it tends to rot. This is essentially a compost pile. Now, they'll argue with me. They'll say, finished compost. Well, when things are finished decomposing, it's just carbon dioxide and water. There's nothing left. This is still decomposing to the day it's gone. It's still decomposing. And if you throw this in a bucket of water in about 2 or 3 days, it'll smell like a sewer in there because it's trying to decompose without adequate oxygen. Water impedes the flow of oxygen to this. That's why when you grow plants in this, you've got to make sure it dries out between water and you get the air back in there so this doesn't cause sewer gases. Plus, the roots have to breathe air too. So that's one thing that we were taught wrong in school too is that a plant, like when I was in, must have been high school, I think, they told us that the roots of a tree were a mirror image of the top. When you see them uplift during the windstorms, you don't see roots any deeper than a foot. So the roots of plants have to go very shallow because they need to breathe air. So the only part of a plant that makes oxygen are the green leaves. In fact, it's the chloroplasts within the green leaves. Well, the chloroplasts are green. So the chloroplasts within the leaves and the stems make the oxygen. The rest of the plant consumes oxygen. So the rest of the plant's like our bodies. And unfortunately, unlike our bodies can circulate the oxygen from our lungs all the way through the body through red blood cells. Plants, oxygen goes out into the air. Air has to go through the soil to the roots. Roots can breathe. Now, the roots do not need as much air as we do because you can't live underground. So plant roots can generally hold their breath for about 2 days, most plants. But they still need that oxygen. It doesn't have to be as high. So they can breathe oxygen and water. And one of the reasons that the water districts, I don't know if you've seen some of the places where they're shooting the water in the air, they're oxygenating it to the right amount so that when you turn on the hose, you won't kill your plants. So the tap water has got to contain 6 to 8 parts per million of water. And goldfish need that too. They need that oxygen in the water. They've had lawsuits where sewage retreatment plants had sent their water to orchards. The oxygen content was below 2%, and it wiped out the entire orchard when they flood irrigated the orchard. So the oxygen level in the water is critical, and hydroponics knows all about this. They know there can't be anything dead in that water. Yet we're trying to grow plants in compost.
They always talk about making sure that your tomatoes dry out before you water them. Is that the same principle?
Right, because they're growing them in the wrong. They made up that rule to allow. Yes, tomatoes are grown hydroponically throughout the world. They're growing in water. As long as the water's clean, it's got plenty of oxygen. If you put anything dead in there, especially when it's chopped up this fine, like if you stick a piece of wood in the water, it doesn't do any problem because it doesn't have enough surface area to decompose fast. But when you chop up that wood into 1,000,000 pieces and then put it in the water, it's decomposing at a real high rate. And there's no oxygen left in that water. The roots suffocate, they rot, then they're telling you you're overwatering. And that's been our problem for about 30, 40 years now, and nobody's fixing it. I contact everybody I can who's kind of in charge, and they said, we've never heard this problem. And we have customers that tell us we do everything they tell us to do, and everything rots and dies. And it's because we're trying to grow plants in the wrong thing. Now, when I was a kid, my dad grew all his plants in this sandy loam. He watered everything every day. We never had any problems until the 80s. And suddenly in the 80s, they changed this from this to a sawdust soil mixture because they wanted to make the soil lighter. And suddenly things were rotting in the pots. And then they told us, you can't water every day. And that's when my dad told me, you take over the watering because I can't figure this out. I've watered my plants every day for the last 30 years, and suddenly it doesn't work. So it took us 10 years to figure out it wasn't the water. It was the soil we were trying to grow plants and was no longer the same. It was no longer a mineral. It was now something dead. Now, the problem with this is, they keep telling you can't grow plants in this. This is what we hear from the professors. You can't grow plants here. There's no nutrients. Well, this is what plants grow in. They get their nutrients from this, but this is not their home. This is their home. This is someone else's home. This is the home of mushrooms, bacteria, amoebas, protozoas, termites. They live in this. The nutrients get back to this, but this is not where the plants belong. This is usually the duff layer of the ground, so on top of the soil. So what they found out is that the soil below the ground is 99.1% mineral. But there's 5 inches of dead stuff on average on top of the ground. They call it duff. I got to believe that duff is short for dead stuff. but 5 inches of dead leaves on top of the ground. So that's where the minerals are. This is where the plant's roots live. The mycorrhizae fungi are on the plant's roots mining the dead stuff, and then it recycles it. But the plant's roots can't live in, they can live in this if it's air, so you can live in anything if it's got air, moisture retention, insulation from the heat and the cold. But if they lose one of those, they're in trouble. So the problem with using this as a growing medium, the biggest problem though is there's plenty of bacteria in here that's breaking down plant material. If you try to grow a plant in this, you put leaves of a plant, healthy leaves, cover this on healthy leaves, the plant keep it moist, those leaves start getting spots all over them because all this is trying to eat those leaves up. Even though they're still alive on your plant, you cover it with mulch, it's eating it up because that's its job. The bacteria, the amoebas in here, they want to eat that plant material. So this is like the worst thing you can ever grow plants in. It's like, how'd we end up this way?
But you could put it on top.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that 5 inches is average. I mean, you go to the deserts, it's nothing. You go into the jungles, it's 5 feet. A friend of mine went down to Guatemala, and they said they couldn't believe it. 5 foot of dead leaves underneath those avocado trees. 5 foot. So, but again, you got to make sure you put your plants in the right stuff. Now, this is pretty hard to sell to a customer because real dirt weighs over 100 pounds per cubic foot.
Oh.
Now, the one thing to know too, though, is where does this come from? It's a rock. So when you grind up a rock, you get sandy loam. It's not organic. I mean, it's not living things. It's mineral. So the basic material for soil is like granite. The white parts of the granite are silicon dioxide or quartz. And the dark specks are feldspar, which becomes the clay. And that combination makes your soil. So soil is a combination of sand, and everybody knows what sand is, silt, and clay. Let's pull out this. I use this as my visual aid, but it's not as accurate. Tennis balls are sand, silt is the ping pong balls, and the clay is the lentil seeds. In actuality, the sand would be about the size of a beach ball, much larger. And then so all it is, the sand is relatively round particles of quartz, and quartz is glass. And the silt is just smaller pieces of the sand, so it's quartz too. And then the feldspar, or the clay, is silicon dioxide, which is quartz, associated with aluminum or iron or manganese. Gives it some color. If it's iron, it gives it that reddish brown color. If it's the other mineral, it's more gray colored, so that gives the soil its color. Otherwise, soil would be, just like white sand looks. So now this rock's been tumbling in a river, so all these pieces break off. You get the round stuff. Now there is that stuff called decomposed granite. That's before all little parts of this rock get into the riverbed. Once they're in the riverbed, they get round, and then they come out as sandy loam. And the way soil works, so what soil's got to do, it's got to supply moisture retention, oxygen or air, insulation, and it's got to be stable on top of that so the plant doesn't fall over. The way it does moisture, so all the particles, sand, silt, and clay, have a negative charge. Water's is ionic, it's got positive, negative, so the water molecules stick to each of these particles, one molecule thick, really hard, a little bit looser as it piles on top of them. The thing about the particles, the sand, thousands of molecules thick. Let me draw that in black. It'll collect a layer of water on one molecule thick Silt smaller, still 1 molecule thick, real tight water with a little bit water beyond that. The clay particles are like flakes, like confetti flakes. And they can be as skinny as 28 molecules thick, whereas sand is thousands or even a million molecules. So clay still holds that water 1 molecule thick. So clay is holding, per volume of clay, a lot of water, a lot more than sand is. So clay holds the water in your soil. So now what we also know is sand and silt are almost round. They're not quite, but you look at them in a microscope, you're going, these things are really round because they've been tumbling in a river so much. So what we know is that if you have round objects, the gaps between round objects makes up 1/3 of the volume, the round objects 2/3 of the volume. So if you have just clay and silt as a soil, the air spaces between them is 33% of that soil is air. That's a lot of air going through there. So it's highly, now this is where the journals get everything wrong totally. If it's got a lot of airflow, it's highly permeable. Now the surface area holds the water. That's the porosity of the soil. So if the soil holds more water, it's more porous. We keep seeing them get it wrong. They say, oh, this clay pot is porous, so it breathes better. No, come on, it's clay, it holds water. The clay holds water, it doesn't breathe better. So clay is more porous. The sand is more permeable. Sand breathes better than clay. They all do a pretty good job of insulating. In the southern 48 states, there's no frozen dirt, so the soil won't let the roots get below freezing, at least a few inches deep. And generally, this stuff doesn't move. Like you grow plants in this. One of the big problems we have is I buy trees from another grower. The trees are always leaning because this stuff is collapsing underneath the tree's roots. When we grow a plant in a pot, they don't lean. I mean, it's really stiff, but I get plants from anyone else, they're wobbly because they're trying to grow them in compost. Again, I can't blame the growers because they were taught to do this stuff. It's not their fault. And I talk to professors and I can't understand them. What planet did these guys come from? Takes your confidence in academia, down the tube sometimes. But now I got to admit, the guys at Cal State Fullerton don't use wood products. Guys at Orange Coast College do not use wood product in their growing medium. So I don't know why they don't try to correct everyone else, but I guess that's up to us to do that. So anyway, permeable porous. Now you can see here what happens if your soil is more than about 1/3 clay. There's no more gaps because it fills all the gaps. The gaps between the sand and the silt are 1/3. So it doesn't take much clay to change this into, quote, a clay soil. So if you have more than, say, 35% clay in your soil, you got no breathing. Your permeability just dropped really low. The way you can check this, if you take this soil that in your yard, put in a mayonnaise jar, about half full, maybe a little more, add water to the neck, a few drops of soap, shake it up really good for several minutes, get all the pieces broken down into little bits, and then just set it down on your kitchen counter. The clay will stay suspended for a day, or for hours anyway, because it's so small. But the sand, bigger particle, settles down real fast. The silt on top of it in general. But in general, between sand and silt, it's hard to tell the difference. But the clay is what's important. On this particular sample of this sandy soil from Irvine, this was off a farm in Irvine, the clay, which looks like grease layer on the very surface, is maybe 5% of the volume of that soil, maybe 8%, 5 to 8. That's very low clay. Now, 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago, this would have been called poor soil. Farmers like this nowadays, but back in the 1800s, they couldn't farm in this stuff. They didn't have irrigation. This would dry out really fast because it's mostly sand and silt. They wanted the clay soil. So if you know the history of Orange County, they farmed Los Alamitos, Fountain Valley, where all the clay is, because that was the rich soil. Rich soil holds water, holds nourishment. The clay holds that. As the rivers move the soil, now the hills back behind us are sandy clay. They got a lot of sand, a lot of clay, so that it doesn't breathe too well. As the rivers take it down to the ocean, the sand falls out first. So this area between the foothills and the 5 freeway, perfect soil. That's where this comes from. So Anaheim, Garden Grove, most of Tustin, most of Irvine, inland Irvine, great soil. The clay stays in the rivers a little bit longer, and as it slows down toward the ocean, that's where it drops. So Fountain Valley, Costa Mesa, Los Alamitos, just solid clay in those areas. But clay's not poisonous. The only time it doesn't work, if you've got a plant, you put a plant in there that's growing in compost, darn thing just rots. Because you stuck it in a hole in the clay doesn't breathe too well. The compost is creating sewer gas, your plant just rots in that hole. And then they'll explain to you, oh, you watered too much. If this wasn't in the hole with the clay, it would have never happened. Clay is not toxic, but it doesn't react well with compost. And you can't fix clay when you mix compost, and you make it worse. Yes?
Question. So if I'm planting a tree from your nursery, going to take it home, put it in the ground, I know the traditional method was 50% compost, 50% native soil. What is the right way? I was hoping you could share with everyone.
Well, if you get a plant that's grown properly, now most of the trees in our store are, not all of them. We have to buy in a few things. We're just a half-acre nursery. We don't have enough land here to grow that much. But if you get one from me, and doesn't have any wood product in it that's going to break down quickly, then you just make a hole in the ground, the right depth, put it in it. There's no problem with this soil. It won't react with the soil or the water. So, but yeah, if you we have our own video series, Gary's Best Gardening. I have a class on this subject where we show you how to remove the dirt if it's in the wrong dirt. You see sawdust in there, how to remove it, fix it, or compensate for it. So, in a lot of cases, if you've got clay soil, if you have sandy soil, you're home free no matter what. But if you've got clay soil, you kind of really make the soil airy around this root ball. And you can do that even if you have a good plant from us. Make the soil more airy, more permeable right around the plant. You can do that with pure sand. I have a friend landscaper who, for the last 40 years of his business, he's been surrounding the plants with sand. And he says, everything grows when I do that. So I just continue to surround every plant I put in the ground with sand. Great, doesn't lean, doesn't do all that funny stuff.
Everything, huh?
Yeah, he would do everything in sand.
So what would you recommend, like, if we have raised beds with that, the soil, what we call soil,
Rich mix.
and you're going to add, like...
Well, okay, so the worst thing to do is to buy anything called topsoil. Because the guys who make topsoil are the guys who own dump trucks and front loaders. They don't know anything about dirt. They think if they take this stuff and add manure and wood products to it, suddenly it becomes the world's best dirt. Well, I have to thank them because that's what taught me about dirt back in the early 90s. We did that. We asked the soil company, what's your best soil to fill my raised beds? They sold us a topsoil that was 40% organic. Put it in my yard, filled up, I had 17 truckloads. And filled up all my beds, planted my plants. They looked great for a few months, and then one by one, half of them died within a year. We're going, okay, I'm a nurseryman. This didn't happen at my last house. What happened? Took us 2 years to figure out it was a soil we had brought in. And then, so it took me 10 years to replace all that soil with this stuff. And what we noticed is that the topsoil that we had, when I was digging it out, I would see maybe a single root every 6 inches running through it. When we replaced it with this and dug it up 3 months later, a root every 1/4 inch. So this can support like 20, 30 more times roots than something with compost mixed into it. But the soil companies don't get it because they're not plant experts. They just think they're doing a good job by adding 40 to 50% organic matter to the soil. Now, just so you know, they did a survey. University of California, Davis knows what's going on. I mean, I don't know about the other universities, but they do the farms. And they said in California in 2000, the average farm soil was 1.1% organic by content. They said, perfect. That's where they want to see the organic content, and that's right. That's 1% is about right. They have the farmers turning in about 5 cubic yards of compost into the farms per acre per year. Well, if you know what 5 cubic yards per acre looks like, it's about that thick. It's less than a quarter inch. It's really thin. And that's the maximum they do. Now they do say that there are some farms that are working on reclaimed marshland near the Delta region near Sacramento. 40% organic. He said those farmers can only grow seasonal crops. That's crops lasting a few months, and they have to manage their watering very carefully because things rot super easily in that heavy organic soil. So that's what you're dealing with when you have plants in compost. You've got to manage your watering really carefully or else they rot. Because this stuff has to dry between watering or else the oxygen doesn't get in there.
So, I make my own compost. Can I put it on top of the plants twice a year? You can't do that anymore?
No, that's where it belongs. Now you don't have to, just don't put it in the dirt. When you mix it with the dirt, suddenly there's not enough air left to decompose, to finish.
I just put it on top. I put fertilizer underneath it, and then I put the compost.
Right, very good. You want that on the top. You want, ideally, you can put a lot more than that on there. So just go deep with the compost on top. Now, you don't have to decompose things because nature does actually faster, they said. So if you just throw dead stuff, now, of course, it looks better if you compost some of your kitchen scraps first. But the mycorrhizal fungi in nature, they said, can work in 90 days. They can take a leaf that falls in the ground and put it back in the same tree. So it works really fast.
But that's dead stuff, but you could do that.
You wouldn't have to have it all finished.
No, not at all. Just dead stuff on the ground. So like what Charles was mentioning, we don't like to throw things away. We like to keep, just keep everything within the garden. So, I got to the point where I couldn't stand throwing trimmings from my hedges away. Just take those leaves and put them on, I'd put them underneath my avocado tree instead. But, because all that's valuable stuff to your garden, it's the fertilizer you have is in those leaves. You put the leaves back, you don't have to feed them anymore. So.
Oh, okay. So,
Yes.
So if you have a leaf drop from avocados and the other trees around it,
Oh, yeah. The nature intended those leaves to be recycled on that same plant. I mean, they drop their leaves straight down so they can get them right back. So. Okay, so water-wise, we've been told the last 30, 40 years now, don't overwater. It's like if you have your plants in real dirt, there's no such thing as overwatering. There wasn't any such term as overwatering till the 1980s. When they started growing plants in compost, suddenly they made that term up to figure out what was going on. So, in the Central Valley, a couple years ago when they had that big snowpack, they told the farmers, we want you to help us get the groundwater back up, so just water 3 times your normal amount for a while. Plants love it. They love that water. Water doesn't hurt any plant, really. I mean, cactus love water. If you put cactus in the right soil, our soil, then you can water them every day. It doesn't hurt them. They just grow faster. So you get more weeds. If you water a lot, you get more weeds, but that's the only bad thing about it. So, quick story, if you don't know about our soils, we started making our soils in the early 90s. I was challenged by a researcher from NASA because he said, for the space shuttles, we're setting up soil, and your stuff doesn't work. So I was thinking, boy, this is interesting. I want to listen to this guy. So he showed me what they were doing, but he said, yeah, soil is just silicon dioxide. There's no nutritional value in it. So they sent up their plants into the space shuttle. He was using volcanic pumice in his experiments, but they knew in a space shuttle it would just float around the cabin, so they ended up sending spun glass. Spun glass would be similar to rock wool, so just mineral, but that's what they grew plants in the space shuttle. So, but he showed me all his stuff in his yard and volcanic rock, just straight silicon dioxide quartz glass, essentially. And so I said, okay, well, this is interesting, but it doesn't hold quite enough water in full sun in Orange County to make it through the day staying moist. So we took the volcanic rock and asked the guys over at UC Riverside what holds water the best for our customers, and they told us that peat moss holds water the best. Now, peat moss is a dead plant, but it isn't related to anything we're growing, and it's been dead for 5,000 years, long time. So it doesn't decompose very much, very quickly. So it doesn't seem to cause trouble when you have it in water. So we said, okay, the best water-holding material, the best permeable material, we'll put them together 1-to-1 and see what happens. And lo and behold, we made this product, or we call it our acid mix. It's half volcanic rock and half peat moss. Plants grow really well in it. Our customers loved it. We wanted to change the name to something that sounded a little bit less psychedelic. But they said, no, we know this stuff. We'll keep the name, so we kept the name acid mix. We grow. So it is somewhat acidic. It's pH maybe 5.7, 5.5, somewhere in there. So you can grow a lot of different plants in it, including blueberries, ferns, azaleas. And we can grow plants in water in this. So we had a cyclamen, which is very prone to rot, sitting in a saucer of water for 7 years, bloomed for 7 years nonstop. Finally sold the plant, but it can sit in water, it doesn't go bad. So that's our acid mix. Now we do know that peat moss, if it's half the volume, the peat moss is losing some volume to it as it decomposes slowly. So this one shrinks a bit. So then we came up with a different soil that has less peat moss in it. So this is only 1/3 peat. The rest of it is volcanic rock, sponge rock, sand, and charcoal. Now, there are soils in the world that are rich and black. It's not due to compost. So again, on some of the journals, we've seen the journalists write down, mix compost with soil, make it nice and rich and black. Well, you do that to your soil with compost, it's because it's creating sewer gases, which are totally deadly. So you don't want to make your soil black from compost. The rich black soils of the world are rich and black because of their charcoal content. 1 to 2% charcoal, they said, makes the soil look black. And charcoal is used in filters because it hangs on to minerals like crazy. So it is the rich black soils of the world, 1 to 2%. Organic, they call it the organic, high organic content, happens to be charcoal. So you get a real hot fire, so hot that there's not enough oxygen to burn that wood into ash. It stays as charcoal, and from that point on, that soil is really, really rich. So we added charcoal to this. Boy, it's expensive. Charcoal, this amount of charcoal on the wholesale level would be $50, $60. So we didn't put too much near 5%. It's still higher than it needs to be. We might try to lower the cost of this. But anyway, that's our main soil. Since it's 2/3 inert, we don't see any shrinkage on this at all. That's what this tree is in our top pot. Even though the peat moss shrinks, we think at that amount it's sitting between the rocks, so it's not contributing to volume. So at least we don't see it shrink. Now it may be that the plant's roots are making up the volume of the peat as the peat decomposes, but so that's our top pot. So you can grow anything, you can grow cactus in here, you can grow ferns in it. Doesn't matter what it is, it's just proper soil, so you can water it forever and nothing will ever rot in it. Okay, so water-wise, there's no such thing, quote, as overwatering if your soil's right. Now, you don't want to waste water. So how do you know how much to water? Well, don't get one of those little meters, because they only measure a few inches deep. So before farmers, now there is a tool you can buy, but it only works on farms. So what farmers used to do before they had computers and proper measuring equipment, they used to walk around with a piece of rebar. Now this is a lighter than rebar, but it can still work. And soil, any soil that's moist, you can push objects through it. If it's dry, you cannot. Just like a block of clay, modeling clay, if it's wet, anything will go through it. If it's dry, nothing will go through it. So if it's too dry for plants, the same thing happens. So they used to walk around where they were watering their farms, and if they can push this in at least a foot deep, they were okay. They'd rather see it about 1.5 feet, but below a foot deep. So the plant roots in the ground exist where they can breathe, and where rain and irrigation fall, that's usually in the top foot of soil. In the cities, you rarely see root below, say, 13, 14 inches. You rarely see it. But if the plant is a production plant, so if you're growing crops or fruits, you need to make sure that plant doesn't think it's drying up, or else it's just going to abort its crop, or the fruit's going to crack, or something's going to happen. So you want to maintain your soil moisture at least a foot deep. And that means you can push a stick in the ground a foot deep by hand. It'll go in, unless you're hitting a rock or a root, it'll go in a foot deep. So you want to have your sprinklers going on, so that, or your whatever irrigation you're using, so that you can maintain the moisture at least a foot deep. 1.5 feet is a little better. Up in Oregon, they say, after it rains in Oregon in the winter, it's like 6 foot of moisture. I remember when we had an El Nino one year, we had 30 inches of rain. I can push this thing in my lawn 4 feet. That was that's crazy. It went way down and going, okay, this is really neat. But yeah, it can be up to, say, 5/8 inches thick, but anything thicker than that, it's going to be hard to push it through. But a rebar, the thin rebar you buy at a hardware store, they have stuff that's 4 foot long, and sometimes with a little handle on the end so you can push it easier. That's a nice way to check. So production plants got to be moist at all times. If it's just a landscape shrub and you don't need to produce anything, it's not a big deal. You can let them dry out almost totally. But just know on your grass lawns, if the moisture is a foot deep, your grass looks perfect. Get down to about 8 inches, you start getting that gray look to the lawn. Get down to 6, you get the white tips. Get down to 4 inches of moisture, your grass goes to sleep, turns totally brown, doesn't die. Just goes to sleep. So grass comes from areas of the world that are dry for at least one season. So all grass goes dry, it just goes brown, goes to sleep. And then you get the moisture down to a foot again, and within 2 weeks it wakes up, looks totally normal again. So grass, in my opinion, is the best drought-tolerant plant we have. You have your lawn there, just let it go dry in the summer. It's okay. It can go at least 3 months with no water. And then you water again in the fall and it comes right back. But, they're telling you plant other things that need water all the time. So anyway, that's our water district. And then they'll tell you water deeply and infrequently, develop better roots. University of California, Davis did that study on an orchard, watered one side of the orchard once a week deeply, the other side daily. They dug the trees out of the ground, found out that the trees that were watered daily had a much bigger root system than the ones that were watered once a week deeply. So that doesn't pan out either. Watering more frequently, develops a bigger root system.
So what about, we were born all during the drought. There's no water, just water slow once a week or something, and all the native plants, no overwater. So is it the same theory? In other words, if your native plants are in good soil with plenty of oxygen, you can water off them?
I don't know any plant that doesn't want it to rain.
Yeah.
The problem we have is that most native plants are grown in compost. So they have a big problem with native. I was emailing back and forth with a professor at UC Berkeley because they were studying all the reforestation projects going on where they're putting native plants back into the landscapes by highways, rotting. So I was emailing him my thoughts, and he says, I concur. The growers grow these plants in the wrong medium. They have root rot when we get them. They've already got root rot because they're growing them in compost and not in soil. And that's where we're at. We're in big trouble because none of the growers seem to know anything. Las Politas Nursery, Northern California, ask the question, why aren't nurseries growing plants in real dirt? So they know. But it's like, God, everybody else is clueless. So I've had nurseries that grow native plants having trouble with their plants rotting. So what they do, they put in bigger sticks of wood. Instead of going to sand, which doesn't change, they put in bigger chunks so that it would breathe better. But the end result is going to be the same. It all rots down to black sludge, and then, they think that compost becomes air. Well, it would if it's got good aeration, but if you bury this in the dirt, it becomes like a sludge material or a bog, peat bog-like material, and it doesn't breathe, and it can last for over a decade that way. We've seen it. I mean, I lived in a house with clay soil, and we put a citrus that was in sawdust in the ground to see what it would do. And it took it 10 years to finally do something. It just sat there and sulked for 10 years in its little compost pot, just 10 inches wide in my backyard clay soil, and it just sat there for 10 years not doing anything with the proper watering and everything, and finally it took off. So apparently it takes like 10 years for that compost to stop being a problem. It finishes decomposing enough that it's no longer making the sewer gas, the roots can get going. But the people who grow plants for orchards know better. The people who plant plants for retail customers are just doing what they're told by the universities, which is they told them that plants grow faster in compost. Now, we have a problem more so in California than they do in other parts of the world, our country, in the nurseries, because if you are in Illinois and you're selling container plants, you bring them in the spring and you sell them out before fall. They're gone. You don't want them around. So that's probably one part of the problem. They don't see the problem. Because here we get plants all year round. They sit in our nursery sometimes for years, and if they're in compost, they start dying on us. So we're going, okay, there's something wrong with the soil they're using. If you're in Illinois, you buy your plants only a few months after they've been put in the pot, and then they put them right in the ground and they never see them again. Well, they might die in a few years, but they don't figure out that it's the compost that's in the pot that's killing them. I mean, the nursery industry has been shrinking for 20 years now, I think they said. The horticultural industry has been shrinking since just after 2000. They're blaming it on the fact that most of the baby boomers who fueled the last big boom in the 1980s is getting too old. But again, we're seeing that everyone says plants are too hard to grow. So we're getting from our customers, plants are too difficult. They don't, you water them and feed them and they're still dying. And that's because of what the industry is doing, and they don't get it. They don't get what they're doing. So anyway, watering, if you do it right, can't overwater, keep the water. So Israel found a long time ago, the more often you water, the more efficient the watering. Even in California, they said some farms water 18 times a day in the summertime. They found out that if they just apply the water the plant used the last hour, they're using less water. They said they saved 30% of their water bill watering 18 times a day versus once a week.
What should we do in our home irrigation system? Drip irrigation.
Well, drip is good.
Still, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, every day is better than every 2 days or every 3 days. But again, if you have just landscape plants, you can let them get dried. It's not a big deal. But even then, it's probably better to water them constantly than it is deeply. Now, one thing to know, if your sprinkler's on for more than 4 minutes, the water's not being absorbed evenly anymore. So try to keep your sprinklers cycles down to 4 minutes. Water knows that too. They said more than 4 minutes of watering, you start getting runoff. The ground can only absorb a 1/4 inch per hour, and if you go more than 4 minutes, you've exceeded that. It starts running into different areas that weren't intended, like in the street, puddling up in one spot in your lawn, so one spot gets more water than another. So 4 minutes, you can recycle every hour though, because the average lawn needs about 20 minutes of watering per week this time of year, 40 minutes of watering per week in the summer, 5 minutes of watering per week in the winter. So you can adjust your sprinklers. You can water 3 or 4 times in one day. for short periods to get that water into your lawn. And your production plants not much different. So fruit trees, roses, vegetables. Now we're next to a farm for 4 years, an organic farm. They watered every day. They turn on their drip systems every day. So they know. All the farmers have known for a while. And the time of day they water doesn't matter. The Ag Department told us a long time ago, if you water at midday, you're not wasting water like they say. The only thing that happens if you have sprinklers and you're watering, say in the afternoon, sometimes the wind blows it off target. Otherwise, watering when it's hot in the middle of the day does not waste water. Well, it's not true. On some plants, if they're production plants, you're not wasting water because those plants are breathing, their pores are open, they're evaporating water faster than a puddle will. Your lawn uses water more than a pool does because it's got more surface area than a pond. So they're evaporating water as fast as the air will allow it to. No matter if you water the lawn, the ground, or the plant, it's using the same amount of water. So they said no issues watering midday unless it just wind blows it off target. So now you do have issues with diseases. So if the leaves stay wet for more than 4 hours at night, then you can get disease problems on certain plants certain times of year. When it's real cold, no diseases. This time of year, if your leaves stay wet for half the day, you can get spots going, all this stuff. In the summertime, not a big deal. The air is so dry, nothing stays wet that long. So that's the watering thing. Charles mentioned mulching. Mulching does keep the soil a lot cooler. In Texas, they did a study in orchard, bare dirt around their trees. In the summertime, the soil 1 foot deep where the roots are, 120 degrees. That's way hotter than they want it to be. 3 inches of mulch on top of the ground, 85 degrees, right where the roots like it. So it roots like the zone between 35 and 86. That's where they're the healthiest. Get much above the 80s, they start cooking. So mulch on the ground, real important, or ground cover, something covering the dirt in the summertime. Very important for the way your plants look. Also, they've discovered a long time ago that mulches, especially deep mulch on the ground, will actually generate water. So Texas did this. I was listening to this video. They said they had a drought in the 80s in Texas, and they were just going down the highways, chopping up all the plants, dumping all the chippings on one side of the highway, and they said the side where they dumped all that stuff greened up. They couldn't figure it out. They're still in the drought, and that side just greened up. Well, up in Pacific Northwest, they said, yeah, we couldn't figure out either. Our apple orchards, we had to water them every day in the summer, but the forests next to us were lush. So they said they walked in there in the morning, and that deep leaf litter on the ground was just soggy. They said, oh, okay, let's cover the orchard with 18 inches of mulch. And they said they haven't watered ever since. Now, if you're right near the coastline in California, it might be humid enough. But certainly the mulch doesn't hurt, and you go that deep, you have a good chance of generating some moisture in there. So
it's like leaves and some wood chips.
Yeah, they said what they do is they call up the local tree companies. When they're chopping up trees and bushes, they just say, bring them over, dump it in our orchard, and we'll scatter it out.
Same thing you have in that something bag?
Well, this is finer textured, so they use a coarser mix that breathes a little better. So this chopped up trees. Yeah.
That rubber stuff doesn't work the same.
It'll probably create moisture, but it's not very good for the plants, I don't think, the rubber. Rubber mulch. Chopped up tires don't work as well for plants. I don't think they like that as much. But it'll still insulate. So.
I've often wondered, what's good to do with your ashes from the fireplace? Isn't that alkaline?
Right, ashes, because it's totally oxidized, it is alkaline. It's still nutritious, but don't put too much on at one time. We're very alkaline here. Our water's alkaline, our soil's alkaline. So not too much. If you're,
Is it in your compost pile?
yeah, everything else is acidic. All the organic materials are otherwise acidic. So, Okay, the other topic we wanted to cover is crop rotation, so the reason for that. So in nature, I mean, the U.S. Forest Department figured this out a long time ago. They found out that trees can stay healthy as long as they can grow their roots further out every year. Because every year they make, say the previous year they make roots here, all these fine roots, thick roots, and a lot of them die during the winter. And then every year they make a new root system. Well, this dead root system here, even though it's not much volume in the soil, it's like 1% or less, it's like having dead pieces of your arm around. You don't want that. So in order to remain healthy, they've got to grow further out. So they say as long as a tree can afford and maintain a root system further and further away, it can stay healthy. Once it cannot afford to do it anymore, it dies pretty quickly. So like a redwood tree may be healthy for 3,000 years, but then it reaches its maximum size and it dies maybe within 100. To us, that's a long time, but to that tree, boy, it dies fast because it can't support a bigger root system. So it's now living within its old root system, which is real bad, ugly stuff, and it dies pretty fast. So the same thing happens with any plant. If you grow a tomato, say this is a tomato, you grow the root system out, it dies when you pull the plant out. You plant a new tomato in there. Now, that was only like 3 months, so it's not so bad. You can plant another tomato in there. The first time you plant a tomato in your garden, oh, it's absolutely gorgeous. You go, oh, tomatoes, no problem. We can grow tomatoes. Second time you grow tomatoes in that same plot, they turn a little yellow, a little faster. You go, oh, it's still decent. Third year you do it in the same spot, it dies halfway through the season. You're going, okay, what's wrong with me? I can't grow tomatoes anymore. Well, it's because you're not rotating your crops. You're building up the dead bodies in the ground over and over and over, and eventually catches up with you. Now, the farm we were next to for 4 years told us they were on a 10-crop rotation cycle. So they would only grow one crop every 10 crops, which maybe takes 3 or 4 years to grow through 10 crops before they get back to the crop. They want to grow strawberries. Strawberries is a money-making crop in Orange County. Now you can grow marijuana and make even more money. But the main crop that the farmers outside grow that makes some money is strawberries. So everything else they're growing may not make money. They just want to get back to the strawberries. Because they'll grow cabbage. They don't make any money on cabbage. But it's part of the rotation cycle. So we gave you that sheet that has the plant families on it so you know which. So if you want to rotate your vegetables properly, you don't use the same family. So, in your backyard, we say make at least 3 beds. Have all your tomato family or Solanaceae in one bed, and something else, and keep rotating them every year so you don't have them in the same bed for more than 1 year at a time. Anything that's not related to tomatoes, so corn, beans, squash, would be a rotation crop for tomatoes. But again, if you like a lot of squash, cucumbers, melons are all in that same family. You have to make sure they're not in the same bed year after year. So you want at least 3 beds that you keep separate. So that's one of the keys we do. But anything else. So I met a guy who worked in an apple orchard. He says, I was in charge of replacing apple trees that our crew sometimes accidentally killed, trucked into it, or something happened to the tree. So he would take the tree out, dig out this much dirt, about 3 foot, 1.5 feet deep, dig another hole way far away, change the dirt, put a new apple tree in that dirt. Because you killed the apple tree, now you got dead apple roots in the ground. Now you can grow anything else there. A citrus tree doesn't care if there's dead apple roots in the ground, but an apple tree or a pear tree closely related would care. But they wanted this to be an apple orchard, so they took out the dirt. So they're rotating the dirt. Instead of rotating the plants, they're rotating the dirt. They took this dirt out, put in dirt, quote, virgin dirt, put it back in the hole, put the new apple tree back in, and away goes just fine.
rotation when we could take a certain.
Right. You can take all the dirt out.
Does that be all or a certain?
I don't know how much you want to risk your crop.
I've heard like 25. If you replace 25%.
Yeah. Doesn't take much dead root to cause trouble. Just see how we do with humans. Someone gets killed in your body, how much of the dead pieces you want out of there before you want to live in there again? You don't want much at all. So it doesn't take much to ruin the ground. So now, of course, on farms, in most farms, especially the ones where they use tractors, the root system, the plant's not that much volume of the soil because they've got the place where the tractors go through, the people walk, where the plants are, where the drip irrigation is. So the plant's roots may not be that, using all the soil. When you have raised beds like this, it's 100% of it's got roots in it, every quarter inch or so. So you want to rotate well. Yes.
Raised bed garden, and I kept my tomato in the same bed, but the same tomato plant lived for 5 years, and then it died. I put different tomato plant in the same area, and it's fine.
You must have some really good hybrids. So they do make tomatoes that, you just planted them?
Huh?
You just planted them this year?
The new tomatoes, yes.
Yeah. Well, just watch and see how fast they die. They won't make it through their entire year, but what we know is, so a lot of the hybrid tomatoes like Big Boy, Big Beef, Better Boy, Early Girl, they were bred to live among the dead. So, yeah, they were bred that way. If you get an heirloom in there, it dies really fast. It wasn't bred for that purpose, but the hybrids like Better Boy, Big Beef especially, that thing can live year after year in the same soil because it was bred for that purpose. It is resistant to all the things that happen on dead tomato roots, verticillium, fusarium, all these kind of viruses.
4 tomatoes, different kind, growing in the same spot. Peat was one of them. Cherry tomato, Roma tomato, and then one pear tomato.
Well, you got to compare it. Well, the main thing to compare it with, if you want to grow a good plant, either grow them in our potting soil or grow them in pure sand, because that'll be your best case scenario where you got the best conditions, and then you can see how it compares. Because I know in a lot of potting soils, tomatoes don't grow very well anyway, comparatively to what they would do in good soil. So you can check that out and see.
So how would you recommend that we have raised beds to amend that? We're saying clear out the soil that we bought from the hardware stores, just throw sand in there and then cover it?
Sand is incredibly vigorous.
Like playground sand?
Playground's a little expensive. If you just get washed sand,
Well, I live across the street from a playground.
yeah, well, it'll work.
What about beach sand? It has
Too much salt. But we did our first experiments in sand. This was back in the early 90s. And the first experiment we did was with strawberries. So strawberries, I don't bring one in here, are a good example of what would happen. So we were using the organic potting soil. We were selling organic potting soil at that time. So the strawberry plant was this big, had strawberries about that big on it. In pure sand, 2 foot wide. We're going, okay, this potting soil we're selling is a joke. We couldn't believe it. I mean, it opened our eyes totally. The sand strawberry plant had leaflets this big. The plant was 2 foot wide. The one in the potting soil was this big. The strawberries were that big. It's like, there was no comparison.
Because we're told that strawberries need acidic soil. So how does sand carry acidity?
It doesn't. It's neutral.
Right.
It doesn't need, acidic soil you need. The only time the pH matters the most, if you're using chemical fertilizers. Because certain chemicals dissolve at certain pHs. If you're organic, the pH doesn't matter.
So in your scenario with the strawberries in sand, you feed the strawberries? So how do you feed the strawberry?
Put either any fertilizer on top of the soil will feed them.
So you could use an organic chemical fertilizer?
Organic fertilizer, the chemical fertilizers, anything like that will work. We like to put it on top. Yeah. Because
There's certain
Well, most of the organics have to be in air to break down properly. If you bury them too deep, they may never work because they don't have enough air down there to decompose properly. The chemicals doesn't matter as much, but you lose chemicals by leaching. So it's better to have them on top so they have a chance to go through the whole root system. Yes.
Gary, a year ago I came in and asked, because I needed a truckload of the equivalent of your acid mix, and you said go to this particular, in Costa Mesa, where I was building my my raised beds.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Rick's Mix, but I can't remember the name of the place.
Larry's Building Materials.
Larry's Building Materials, and it was called Rick's Mix, and it was primarily decomposed granite. I have to tell you guys, I've never had such good tomatoes in my life. It's absolutely amazing.
So what Rick's Mix is, a gentleman who used to work for me is Rick Carrasco, and he used to like to use soil in people's yards that was half decomposed granite, half sandy loam. Now again, the major difference, this hasn't been through a river yet, this has. Otherwise they're both basically quartz. But I like the texture of that mixture. It is a nice texture to work with. It's not so muddy. And so they make it down at Larry's Building Materials in Costa Mesa off of Baker Street, and they call it Rick's Mixed in his honor. And if you want to buy it from them and fill up your planter beds, it does work quite well. It does work quite well. Yeah. Well, anything. We covered my mom's yard in decomposed granite. We covered her yard in Rick's Mix. She has in pure clay, and we covered it with about 6 inches of Rick's Mix. And a lot of the trees in the yard that had never grown in 30 years suddenly just took off.
Put it over what was already there.
Yeah.
Right on top.
Yeah.
And then we put a quarter-inch of chicken poop across the
Yeah.
top of that.
Yeah.
And I
Chickens.
I didn't have to do any fertilizing the rest of the season. That was it.
Chicken manure is amazing stuff. I will mention chickens poop out almost pure chemical. Compared to other organics, birds poop out chemical fertilizers. But it is amazing stuff. So.
I had some strawberries in just around the bush and a raised planter, fruit tree, and they tumbled onto the side into my BG in the walkways. They're going like mad. In my BG.
Yeah.
Is that crazy? And when you told me about the sand, I gotta get some.
Well, see, in your case, the limiting problem was the air in the ground. DG breathes really well, so they just took off.
It's amazing.
What is that DG?
Decomposed granite.
Okay.
This stuff. It's a little chunkier than sandy loam is.
But don't they use decomposed granite to make like a walkway?
Mhm.
Nothing supposedly grows on that, I thought.
Well, there's no seeds in there. See, if you get sandy loam, there's so many weed seeds in here, you get a lot of things growing anyway. But decomposed granite off of a mountainside may not have any weed seeds in it yet, so it just takes longer. But if you keep this wet, weeds will grow. But it's also easier to pull the weeds out of this.
What about if you have it on a hill? Doesn't it run off? It won't run off.
Even this doesn't run. I'm amazed. In our backyard, my last house was totally clay, so we brought in 2 pickup loads of this and piled them up. And had them there uncovered for 10 years because I wasn't ready to plant my trees yet. Didn't move at all. Because sand is, you go to the beach, it's really hard for those waves to move sand. Clay moves. Sand really doesn't.
So these two combined together, put them on.
Yeah.
How much of it should it be?
As much as you want, but if you have existing plants, don't cover them too deep because the roots, even though this breathes real well. Yeah, so you can put as much on as you want. It's fine.
When they start digging and putting the plants in there, will that make a difference if it's dug in? No? Okay.
No, it's good stuff. Breathes really well.
You can't just put it over grass.
Well, you can put grass. In the old days, the normal practice in the summer on grass was to bring in about a 1/4 inch of dirt and just put it over the lawn. Because no one used to thatch, and no one thatches today either, but we used to have to thatch lawns, comb out all the dead stuff so the grass wouldn't die. Instead of that, they would just cover it with a new layer of dirt so the grass would have virgin soil to grow into. And so grass can grow through sand about a 1/4 inch at a time. So if you put dirt over sand, over lawns, it'll just keep up with you. 1/4 inch a month, it'll just keep up. It'll love it.
The right kind of dirt that has oxygen.
Well, yeah, sandy soil is better than clay, but even grass doesn't care. Grass will live in clay too. But yeah, just pile it on there. Your lawn will absolutely love. Gorgeous.
You're saying the sand will retain water?
A little bit. Doesn't retain as much. See, the thing about sand versus clay. So sand, to wet 1 foot of sand requires about a 1/2 inch of water. To wet 1 foot of clay requires about 2.5 inches of water. So clay will hold almost 5 times more water per foot than sand does. But the roots on plants can grow far deeper in sand than they can in clay because they can breathe far deeper. So it's almost a wash. It's just for starting plants in sand, you got to water more frequently. But eventually, it doesn't make any difference at all because the roots are just, the roots in sand can grow 10 feet deep. In clay, they can only grow 8 inches deep because they can't breathe.
So what about mixing clay and sand?
That's fine. Doesn't make concrete, like some people say. Also, all good soils have all 3 components: sand, salt, and clay. I didn't go over this too well because this is not the right class for that. But like this soil is about 80%, 70% sand, maybe 25% silt, and 5% clay. The soil in the hills back here is maybe 35, 40% clay. Fountain Valley may be over 50%. But we were told by the Ag Department that there's no soil in Orange County that's clay enough that if you mix it half and half with sand, it'll then breathe. So any soil in Orange County, if you mix it 50% clay, or equal volumes of clay, then you'll knock the clay content down below 35%, and it'll breathe. So.
What about when they say to put, I think it's calcium sulfate onto your soil to break up the clayness? What is that about?
Doesn't do anything. So that's gypsum. So gypsum helps sodium leave. So if you're within a few miles of the ocean, you can smell the ocean. You might have a lot of sodium in the ground, and sodium does make soil slimy. So if you put gypsum in that soil and you water it, then the sodium gets released and goes with the water, and then the gypsum takes its place, which is not so sticky. But that's the only thing it can do is get the sodium out of the soil. But calcium's good otherwise. It's always nice to put calcium sulfate in your ground because it is one of the major nutrients. I mean, yeah. Yeah, my daughter gets all these eggshells throughout all our plants in her yard. Oh, just throw them out there.
I'm still blown away with this acidity thing. So, like, you could take sand and put a blueberry in sand.
Okay, blueberries I'm a little worried about. They seem to respond well to pH, and azaleas do too. Now, they might have a separate problem. So we found out on azaleas, because I was feeding my azaleas organically with the Dr. Earth or azalea stuff, and it wasn't responding. The leaves are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I asked Milo, the guy from Dr. Earth, what's going on. He says, azaleas, the heather family, which blueberries are a part of, and manzanitas are too, have a special mycorrhizae fungus to break down their organic materials. And even though we put in this bag of our azalea acid fertilizer, it doesn't often survive in it. So your azaleas are starving. He told me, you got to put the chemical fertilizers on them for this time. So I did that, and they responded really well. With blueberries, for the most part, we fertilize them organically, but we have seen at times where it does help to get the high acidity on them again. So I can grow blueberries for 5 years in our acid mix alone, but eventually they turn a little pale. Throw the sulfate ammonia on them, which is what all the blueberry farmers use, and boy, they just turn real lush again. So they may respond well to that as high acidity too. So azaleas can have a problem. Blueberries, we know manzanita, unless you get the right mycorrhizae on them, just starve to death with organics. So you got to get they said for manzanitas, go up to the hills, find a manzanita plant, grab the dirt from underneath it, throw it underneath your manzanita plant, and then it'll respond to organics. So you have to have that fungus there for them to eat to use organic fertilizer, or else they can't use it. So you have to go and get the dirt from underneath an existing manzanita plant in nature, because that fungus is with them, and just bring the soil back with you. So our azaleas eventually were okay with the organics. So the mycorrhizal fungus made it to them, but it took them a long time for that to happen. So
you guys put mycorrhizae.
well, not for azaleas. It's just yeah. I don't know about blueberries. I haven't seen anything written about them, but
I use the Dr. Earth, the acid liver fertilizer to my blueberries.
and they're fine.
They seem fine.
Yeah.
They're also not. They're maybe getting 5 years old. I have no blueberries right now.
So blueberries are real sensitive to the soil use. So use something, like for a long time, Dave Wilson was telling all the nurseries plant them in bark and peat, and they just rot out in 3 years. So Dave Wilson finally seems to change their thing to peat and perlite. Well, I think there's still some wood in there, but they're using something more permanent to keep it breathing. But in our acid mix, we've seen them go 10 years, get about 8 foot across and about 5 foot tall and a half barrel.
Do they stay after 10 years?
I don't know. We keep selling the plants. That's about as long as we can hold on to. I don't know what the lifespan of a blueberry plant is. I don't think it's all that long. I would think that it's like roses. You get good 10 years out of them. That's pretty good. With blueberries, I don't know what their lifespan. Because a lot of fruit trees are best in the first decade, and then they slow, like peaches, first 10 years, and they just start declining. Pomegranates, even though they can live 500 years, they say it's the first 50, and then they start declining. So I don't know what it is on blueberries before it's nice to replace them. So we didn't cover a lot because Charles took a lot of it. Any questions else?
How do I find out? Well, do you find out the type of soil you have by doing that shake up in the mayonnaise jar?
Yes. So you can see the health. It's mainly how thick your clay layer is. So if you have more than 1/3 clay, then it's not going to breathe that well. So now again, clay is not poisonous as long as you don't put the compost in it, or you don't plant plants that are growing in compost in it. It's really weird. Before 1980, no one had trouble growing plants in clay. And after 1980, everybody who has a clay yard is having trouble growing plants, and no one figures it out.
I thought I was supposed to be amending it with the organic stuff.
Well, they keep telling you that. Now, if you put the organic stuff on top of your clay, it still does all its good things.
Okay.
It doesn't do any more bad things. But when you bury it, it's doing all the bad things.
You don't even have to dig.
Right.
And how about keeping weeds out better? Does that, putting all that out?
Mulch on top of your ground. Just a deep layer of mulch is as good as you can do.
I'm in Costa Mesa, so my dirt basically is clay. I think when they building the house, it used to be like a potato farm or something like that. But I don't ever, for my orchard, for my fruit trees that's along the wall in my backyard, I don't ever mulch, and I don't ever add soil to it. I just use what's there. And whenever I want to plant a new tree, a fruit tree, I basically just dig a hole, and then I loosen, the whatever it is, and just plop the tree down. But I make sure wherever I plant it, there's a lot of space. I don't compact that fruit tree down, and then I build a moat around the base, where it can capture more of the water, and that's it.
Well, a lot of times minimal is better.
Yeah, I don't really do anything to my fruit trees, and they produce really. I might fertilize it, like once or twice a year. But other than that, I don't water much at all.
Well, you are near the coast. That does help.
So